Like I care what happens to you. You listen to me if I see the cops here again. I'm going to assume you were the one that called them on me, and I'll kill you. I don't need them shutting down my business again." He then pushed me down and walked into my house. With me looking on terrified, he used the baseball bat to smash my television, along with other fragile belongings. He trashed my living room and then stared me down as he walked out of my house. Let that be a lesson for you. For your sake, I just hope that it's enough of one. I was petrified, and I didn't know what to do for several minutes. Hey there, my name is Trevor, and I had the worst neighbor imaginable. They made my new peaceful home a complete nightmare instead of the idealized dream that I was hoping that it could be. Let me start off by saying I had moved to a small street in the suburbs where I was hoping to live in a place that was quiet and peaceful. I had lived in an apartment most of my life in a thriving city, and I wanted a change. So I started saving up money, and eventually was able to put a healthy down payment on a house on a dead-end street. Thankfully, the market was good, and the interest rates were low enough that my payments were actually a bit less than my rent had been inside the city. After I moved in, everything seemed great, until the house next to me sold as well. I figured that my new neighbor and I could bond over moving to the street at roughly the same time, but the first time that I met him, pretty much told me that he wasn't interested in making friends. "Hi there, my name is Trevor, and I just moved here myself. Where did you live before this?" "Yeah, that's nice. Sorry, but I didn't move here to make friends." "Oh, sorry. I just figured it would be good for us to know each other in case we ever needed to talk about something since we're neighbors." "Nope, I'm not interested." "Listen, bud, just stay on your side of the property line and leave me alone. If you do, then we won't have any problems. Got it?" I just nodded and then headed back to my house. After all, I had moved there for peace and quiet, and I could tell that my new neighbor would not be a source of either. I could only hope that maybe they too were just looking for a quiet place to live and were maybe a bit too aggressive about it. At any rate, once my neighbor Scott had fully moved in, I figured that things would quiet down and I could really begin to relax. However, 1 week after fully moving in, I started noticing some odd things about Scott. For one thing, he constantly had people visiting his house at all hours of the day. At first, I thought this was odd, but then I just assumed he was running a business from inside his home. After all, the people that would come to his place wouldn't stay for more than 10 minutes at most. Since it wasn't creating too much of an issue, I ignored this heavy traffic, even though people would sometimes park in my driveway or clog up the dead-end street while going and visiting Scott. It was annoying, but not too bad, until I noticed how bizarre some of the people that visited him were acting. Some of them would stumble out of their vehicles and into his house and then stumble back out and drive away erratically, almost as if they were heavily drunk and driving while under the influence of something. The fact that they managed to not hit something while driving away was a miracle. I knew that it would cause problems, but I felt I needed to say something about these kinds of people driving in my neighborhood, and so I went over to Scott's house and knocked on his door. "Hey, listen. I've seen a few people leaving your place and they look like they're drunk or something, and they've almost hit some people while driving away. I don't want to tell you what to do, but can you talk to your friends and maybe get them to be more responsible?" "Excuse me? I have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe you should just mind your own damn business." "If you won't speak to them, then I'll be forced to call the police and report them. We can't have people driving around like that. For crying out loud, there are little children playing on the street. Yesterday, a guy left your house and he backed up into my garbage cans and then drove across the yard across the street for a bit before he steered back onto the road. You can see the tire marks on our neighbor's front lawn still. What if some kids were playing there when it happened? Then they would learn to mind their own business. You listen to me real close, Trevor. If you call the cops, then we're going to have an issue. Do you understand?" To make his point, Scott reached behind the door and pulled out a baseball bat. I knew right away what he was implying with it, and I put my hands up to show that I didn't want any trouble, and I retreated to my home. That night, Scott had a lot of people over, and they filled up our small dead-end street with their cars. There were so many cars, in fact, that no one could leave if they wanted to. They essentially turned our street into a parking lot. What made things even worse was that Scott was playing music extremely loud, and I could hear it even in my basement, which has sound-deafening walls. Towards midnight, the party didn't look like it was going to let up, and that was when police showed up. I panicked, and instantly feared that Scott would think that I was the one that called them, even though I hadn't. When the police showed up, dozens of people either ran out of the house and threw people's back and front yards, or they jumped in their cars and drove away. Even though many drove off, there was still quite a few cars left behind, and the police started having them towed away. By morning, the street was clear, and the police finally left. After they were gone, Scott stormed over to my house and began banging on the door so hard that I thought it was going to shatter. "Trevor, you filthy coward, get out here." "What the hell do you want?" "Get out of here. You called the cops on me, and I'm here to beat your ass to teach you a lesson on snitching." I didn't call the police. I should have, but I didn't. That was when I made the mistake of going outside. I had thought that maybe I could talk some reason into him, but wow, was I ever wrong. "Scott, I get that you're mad, but I didn't call anyone. Now can we just talk about this? I mean, your friends did make it, so no one could leave. What if there had been an emergency? Like, I care what happens to you. You listen to me if I see the cops here again. I'm going to assume you were the one that called them on me, and I'll kill you. I don't need them shutting down my business again." He then pushed me down and walked into my house. With me looking on terrified, he used the baseball bat to smash my television, along with other fragile belongings. He trashed my living room and then stared me down as he walked out of my house. Let that be a lesson for you. For your sake, I just hope that it's enough of one. I was petrified, and I didn't know what to do for several minutes. Eventually, I got up and cleaned up my house. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew that something had to be done. So I went and visited the neighbor across from Scott and myself to see what she thought of the situation. Her name was Beth, and I found her to be a no-nonsense kind of person. "Hey Beth, how are you?"
Exhausted. That idiot next to you and his druggy friends kept me up all night. I had to call the police, and even when they showed up, I still didn't get any proper rest.
"Yeah, I know. Scott blamed me for the police showing up. He came over and smashed my living room in retaliation."
Oh my God. I'm so sorry, Trevor. Sadly, I'm not surprised. I'm still sorry that he took it out on you, though.
"It's not your fault. I just wish there was something we could do."
According to the police, they're working on a case against him. They know all about him selling drugs from out of his house. They just need a reason to go inside so they can legally arrest him.
That gave me an idea. If all the police needed was an excuse to go into Scott's house, then I would make one up. The next day, I gathered up some leaves that had fallen from a tree in my backyard, and I started burning them. I had gotten a permit, so it was okay. And 30 minutes later, I called up the police and fire department and told them that my bonfire had gotten out of hand and that some burning leaves had blown onto my neighbor's roof and that his home was catching fire. They sent out a fire truck and 2 police cars as a result. As soon as they pulled up, the rescue teams went to work. As soon as they saw me, they asked if I was okay. I told them that I was, but that I heard shouts of panic coming from Scott's house, and I was worried that he was trapped and in danger. The police officers smiled as I said this, as it gave them just cause to go inside Scott's house, and minutes later, the fire department and the police were inside his house under the false pretense that he needed saving. I then went inside and made myself scarce, but after a few minutes, I heard lots of shouting and the sounds of a struggle, and when I looked out my window, I saw Scott being dragged towards a police car in handcuffs. He was bleeding from his head and had a massive black eye, and I later found out that when the police charged into his house, that he fought them and had hit them with the very baseball bat that he had threatened me with. They then were forced to use their own batons to subdue him. After he was in handcuffs, they then began to search the house and found hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of illegal drugs and weapons. The police found the evidence that they needed to arrest Scott and drag him away. He ended up being charged with assaulting police officers, along with possession or illegal substances, and selling of illegal substances. The judge saw how much Scott had in his possession, and that this wasn't the first time that he had been charged and gave him over 30 years in prison. The police seized the house and ended up putting it up for auction since it had been used in a crime. A police officer and his family won it in the auction and moved in a month after Scott was sent to spend most of his life behind bars. When Beth and I realized that there was a new owner, we went over and introduced ourselves, and were pleasantly surprised to find that someone much friendlier had moved in, since the police officer moved into Scott's old house. things have completely quieted down. People are no longer driving chaotically on our small little street, and all of us feel a lot safer and more relaxed too. From what I have heard, Scott isn't doing very well in prison though. Apparently, he owed a dangerous gang much money, and when he was arrested, they didn't care, and they still expected to be paid. So some of the gang members who were in prison often attacked and beat him up. He has been beaten up dozens of times in prison and expected to eventually pay them off. To me, it just sounds like karma, if he had only been a friendly and respectful neighbor. But he chose to be disrespectful and aggressive, and it bit him in the butt. Part of me has been wondering if I should write Scott a letter and tell him that I was the one that got him arrested, but I might not. Probably better to just know that I got revenge on him and not let him know that it was me. Probably safer in the long run. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.